Hey movie lovers, this is Does It Hold Up Box Office Edition, where we talk about the top 10 movies from this past weekend, a couple other charts, and then recently on the show, we've been going into a deep dive about something to do with movies, box office, theaters, studios, just a deep dive into something fun. I think you're really going to enjoy this week's. But as always, we start with what were the top 10 movies over the weekend at the domestic box office, so let's go ahead and jump right into that. Moana 2 holds on to first place with another $51.3 million. It has brought its total to just under $300 million in just 2 weeks. It's really impressive. I thought it was going to break that $300 million. It had a significant drop from last week, but no surprise because that included Tuesday showings, Wednesday showing, and Thursday showings because of the 5-day weekend. Wicked in second place in its third week with another $36.4 million. It has broken that $300 million mark. It is currently at $322 million domestically. In week 3, Gladiator 2 comes in third place with another $12.5 million. It has crossed $132 million here domestically. In fourth place is Red 1 in its fourth week with another $7 million. It's still struggling very much to find an audience. Yes, it's still in the top 10, but there's not a lot of competition. It's obviously getting beat out by those top 3 movies pretty handily, but it's just not a good movie and it really hasn't found its audience. So far, its grand total is only $85.8 million. Interstellar is new to this list, obviously not new to theaters though. It had its 10-year anniversary re-release and it brought in $4.6 million because at the end of the day, if you're going to see Interstellar, you might as well watch it on the big screen. Since that movie's initial release all the way back in 2014, it has made $192.6 million. In sixth place is a new movie to this list and a new movie to theaters called Solo Leveling Reawakening. This is an anime special event movie. I don't know much about it, but that poster looks kind of cool though. It brought in a grand total of $2.4 million. In seventh place, also new to the list, is Drummer Boy, a Christmas live showing of Drummer Boy. They do those kind of events sometimes where it's like, come see this Broadway play on the big screen because they record it. They're kind of interesting. I've seen a couple. This one I didn't even know was coming out. Didn't really see a lot of previews for it, and I'm not sure a lot of people wanted to go see it. It made $2.2 million, but it has made $2.8 million overall total so far because it released on Wednesday last week. In eighth place is a new horror movie called Y2K about if Y2K was real and the electronics actually came to life and tried to hurt people. It made $2.1 million. I heard it was pretty good. A lot of fun, so might be worth checking out. Best Christmas Pageant Ever drops to 9th place this week in its 5th week with another $1.5 million, and it's slowly making a little bit of money with $3.4 million here domestically. And rounding out the top 10 is another horror movie called Werewolves, which is new to the list, and it made just over $1 million. Now we're going to take a look at a chart that compares all the weekends in 2023 to those weekends in 2024. Because as I say almost every week here, we can't know where we're going if we don't know where we've been. So is 2024 holding its own against 2023, which was not a banner year for theaters? But if 2024 can come out on top, make a little more money, make even the same amount of money, that would be pretty good considering the dump year that this was basically after last year had the strikes and so many movies getting pushed around and reshoots had to wait. And the first half of 2024 was not very good. But has it been keeping pace with 2023? Well, let's go ahead and find out. It was the 49th week at the domestic box office, and all of the movies led by Moana 2, Wicked, and Gladiator 2, those 3 big movies, every single movie at the domestic box office in release made a grand total of $132.7 million combined. In 2023, the 49th weekend only brought in, all movies combined, $70.4 million, and The Boy and the Heron led the way to a very weak domestic box office so far, and we're just talking weekends here. We are not talking about the whole year overall. So far, last year, all weekends combined made about $6 billion, a little over $6 billion. This year in 2024, all weekends through the 49th weekend have brought in $5.37 billion. So it's roughly 600 to 700 million off. We most likely will not make that in the next 3 weekends, even with 2 semi-big releases in Sonic 3 and Kraven the Hunter, but it's gonna be close. At the end of the year, we will take a look at how well 2024 stacked up against 2023 total box office and see if we can match that 8.9 billion that they all made last year. We're gonna go ahead now and take a look at the top 10 movies of 2024 so far, and what I do believe might end up being the final 10. I think maybe Sonic 3 has a chance to get in this top 10 if it's a good movie, but I don't see anything else pushing one of these movies out. There is a couple changes this week. Inside Out 2 is still number 1, followed by Deadpool and Wolverine. Despicable Me 4 is in 3rd place still, but the next 2 movies have jumped up 3 spots each. 4th is Wicked with that 322 million, and Moana 2 in 5th with just under 300 million. Beetlejuice 2 is in 6th, falling 2 places this week. Dune Part 2 and Twisters are in 7th and 8th, also falling 2 spots this week. And then rounding it out is Godzilla Kong in 9th and Kung Fu Panda 4 in 10th. That's it for the charts, talking about what's been happening at the recent box office, but it got me thinking, what happens at the box office overall? For all the years, I mean, at least as far back as people have been monitoring how much money movies have made. And so I wanted to start a little bit of a series here over the next couple of weeks when it comes to this. So this week, we are going to take a look at how many movies released theatrically that reported a gross from 1980 through 2024, and see if you can notice a trend of how movie releases have just sort of escalated over the years. Then next week, we're going to take a look at what the box office gross was, total gross domestically, for each one of these calendar years, and see if we can make a connection. Is more movies actually better for theaters, or should theaters and studios go back to making better quality but lower quantity movies? So let's take a look at a series, the first in a series, and we're going to take a look at the total movies released every year from 1980 to 2024. In this first chart, you'll see we're going back to the 1980s. We could have went back maybe a little bit farther, but the numbers kind of get a little skewed there, so we're going to stick with the 1980s. And you can see that there's a nice gradual shift here. It starts very low in 80 and 81 with 98 and 89 theatrical movies only that reported a gross. There might have been a couple more that numbers just never came in for them, but those were the ones that actually reported. And then it kind of just slowly, gradually jumps up till we hit 1988 at its highest for the 1980s with 242 movies. And then it drops slightly in 1989. But here, in this decade, the highest amount of movies released in a single year was 242. That is not a very high number, especially when we move forward and we go into the 90s. The 90s actually start rather low. They jump down from what was happening in the 80s, all the way from its peak of 242 down to 230. But then 1991 hit, and 242 was back in theaters. And then it drops a little bit, drops a little bit, but from 1995 on, you can see that is just a gradual increase, all the way from 312 to 339, 360 to 387 in 1998, and then hitting a decade high of 484 in 1999. This is most likely because camcorders hit the home market in 1983. The first direct-to-video movie released to the public was in 1984, but they were still rather expensive at that time. In the 90s, more handheld camcorders came out, things that you could videotape kids opening Christmas presents, birthday presents, family parties, just adventures out. They became a little more acceptable to have in a common household. So what did that do? That created a ton of new filmmakers who had access to technology and equipment that they never had access to before. So I think in about the mid 90s is when a lot of households decided, you know what, we're going to own a camera and we're going to start recording stuff. And that created a whole new wave of filmmakers who saw their opportunity to make a movie and present it to somebody. And if it played in a couple theaters and reported even the tiniest gross, it's going to make this list. So I think making cameras affordable in the 90s is why we really saw this boom. We're going to go ahead and move on to the 2000s now. And you're going to see these numbers are a lot higher than they were in the previous 2 decades. We start at 532 in the 2000s. So from 1999 to 2000, there was around 100 movies, more movies hitting theaters. We drop a little bit in 2001, but then we get a steady increase to 2004, hitting 676 theatrical movies that year. We drop 3 movies in 2005, but then jump up huge in 2006, all the way up to 736 movies, hitting a decade high in 2007 with 770 movies in theaters. There are only 52 weekends in a year. You had 770 movies hitting theaters that year. That is tons of new movies hitting theaters every single week. I can't imagine who got to see all those. If it was even possible to see all those, you'd have to watch 2 plus movies a day, about 2.2 movies a day to watch every single new movie that released in 2007. Then we have a little bit of a drop in 2008 and an even bigger drop to 2009. I think this is when studios were really starting to worry, like, hey, maybe we need to cut back just a little bit. And you'll see that when we talk about the actual box office numbers next week. Moving into the 2010s, you can see that it's kind of level. From 2009 to 2010, there are about the same amount of movies released. Then we get a gradual increase all the way up to 2016 with 828 movies that year. A little bit of a drop in 2017, but then a decade high 855 movies released in theaters in 2018. Now, one of the reasons could be is that back in 2008, the MCU started, and everybody started to put together all of these cinematic universes, and they need to be releasing 2 or 3 movies a year to connect them all, and studios were just kind of throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. This is where we see a little bit of a downturn in the box office, and studios were scrambling to figure out how to get people back in theaters and get that money rolling in again. And they thought the idea was throw as many movies at the wall as possible, and hopefully they're all going to make money. We're going to move ahead into the 2020s. We've only had 5 years so far in this decade, and not even a full 5 years because we're not quite done with 2024 yet. But you can see 2020, only 428 movies released that year, but that was the pandemic year. That's when theaters here in the United States and Canada completely shut down. Almost all of them anyway. There were still some that were open in some areas, and people were still kind of going to see movies, especially towards the end of the year, but nothing like it had been, and studios understood that, and they just weren't putting movies out. Out of this 428 movies, many of these were low-budget independent features because it was their chance to shine. Nothing else was in theaters. I mean, might as well put your little movie out and see if it can make some money. 2021, 426 movies. We were still bouncing back from the pandemic. 2022, we see a little bit of an increase to 486, followed by 2023 up to 565. And then this year so far, it has been 595 theatrically released movies. Again, we're still bouncing back from the pandemic. A lot of people assumed in 2021 it was just kind of over, and it's still kind of there. People weren't ready to go back out yet. And even a couple years later, I'm not 100% sure that everybody wants to flood back into theaters and be seated right next to people who are coughing and sniffling, taking their shoes off, and just getting a little too comfortable in public. But that 595, we're going to add a couple of that. We're going to get back into the 600s, but I wonder if there's a reason for that as well. Let me know in the comments below what you think the reason is that movies outside of the pandemic have slowed down being released in theaters. Yes, we had the strike last year, but you would think during the strike when movies weren't being released that a lot of those would get dumped this year and we would have seen a massive increase. But we didn't, and I wonder why. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And the last chart we're going to look at here is a total breakdown of all the movies we just talked about from 1980 to 2024. The total number of movies released over those years was 21,775 movies. On the left of this chart, you'll see how that breaks down. In the 80s, it was about 1,800. In the 90s, 3,100. The 2000s, 6,500. And then the 2010s, a massive amount of movies, 7,844. And then in the 2020s, we're only 5 years in, and it's been about 2,500, even doubling that over the next 5 years. Still doesn't get us anywhere close to that 7,800 in the 2010s. So it's really just the 2000s and the 2010s. Those two combined are 2/3 of all the movies released over the last 44 years. Some crazy stuff to think about. Next week, we're going to break down all these decades' total box office gross and see if we can match up why some of these numbers look the way they look. So make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. We're going to be talking about decades box office stuff over the next couple of weeks. So be prepared for that. It is a lot of fun. I'll be back again later this week with an Oscar Redux where I go back in time and I tell you which movie should have won which Oscars and if the Academy got it right or wrong. So hopefully you'll come back for that. In the meantime, be good to yourself, kind to others, and keep watching movies.